Hello, it's Dawn Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do the Taurus season decks. So we are at the time I'm filming this video, we are in Taurus season, and I've been doing the Decan Walk along with Marlena Teresa and a few of my friends, and it's been really wonderful to explore the tarot decks through the lens of the zodiacal wheel. And it's been really interesting for me because had you asked me before starting the Decan Walk if I had decks that felt like Taurus season, I would have pulled out every single earthy deck that I have in my collection, like anything that is very green and nature-based and all of that, and I would have said, yep, that's all my Taurus decks, right? All the earthy ones. Not really thinking about the fact that Taurus season is in the spring. Then as we've gone through the decans and we're learning about, or I'm learning about the zodiac associations, I'm gonna have a very basic bare bones understanding because I also did my birth chart and all of that kind of good stuff. But I realized that like the Empress Venus energy is also very much at play in Taurus. So it was just really interesting to look at it through that lens. And what I decided to do for this video, this is the book, The Stars Within You, A Modern Guide to Astrology. So this was my sort of reference guide for when I was doing my birth chart and trying to learn more about the different signs and like, you know, the houses and working through my own personal information. Now, my sun sign is in Taurus because my birthday is in May. So I always felt like I associated pretty closely with Taurus energy. I definitely have a lot of bull aspects to me. I am very, very stubborn, and I also feel like I'm very grounded most of the time in reality, except for when I'm out like up exploring the idea of the cosmos and the universe and everything within it that's connected. So that's not really Taurus energy, but I do feel very in touch with that energy. So what I decided to do was to actually take this kind of information, this idea of Taurus through its kind of different aspects, and select my decks or look at my collection and find decks that I felt like were in alignment with that energy. So unlike the Aries video where I was just like, do these feel like Aries? Maybe, maybe not. I feel like I have a firmer grasp on Taurus energy. So what I did was kind of broke it down into its three sort of main aspects. So we have the ruling planet, which is of course Venus. We have the symbol, which is the bull. And then we have the element and the quality, which is earth and fixed. So Taurus is a fixed sign and it is in the element of earth or related to the element of earth. So I kind of took those ideas along with the idea of the Hierophant, which is the tarot card associated with Taurus season, and the Empress, which is the tarot card associated with the ruling planet of Venus. And that was the lens through which I chose the decks for this little Decan deck collection. So let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to start with the three decks that I chose for Venus. So the ruling planet of Venus in Taurus, and I chose the Fyodor Pavlov, the Victorian Romantic, and the Tarot Muha. Several of these I've already shown you in my spring basket collection, which makes sense considering that like Taurus is in spring season. Okay, so Venus is all about beauty and sensuality, and this deck I feel like, okay, well maybe not that card, but this deck I feel like has that like in spades. The whole deck itself feels very lush. It's on beautiful linen cardstock. It is very nicely gold gilded. It even has the gold foiling or gold stamping, I forget what we call that, on the back. But these images are just so incredibly beautiful and like flowy, and they feel very Venusian in that sense. And so I thought this was a good one to represent the ruling planet in Taurus season, which is Venus, which also relates to the Empress. So this is, again, one of those sides of the Empress where we have that beauty, that sensuality, and that's kind of these first three decks, what we're going to be looking at. I haven't done a ton of work with this deck yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to working with it. Perhaps it might be a good one for this season because it does feel like it fits in that energy of Venus, but it also does feel like it fits in the energy of the just Taurus in general, of being sort of grounded and practical, because this is like a Rider-Waite-Smith. It's a very practical deck in that sense. I feel like it's probably going to give readings that are very practical and relatable. And again, that feels very much in that Taurus energy. But I chose this one for the Venus, so the ruling planet, because it's just so dang pretty that it just, I think, fits the bill for that Venus energy beautifully. So the next deck that I chose for Venus energy is the Victorian Romantic. And it's so funny because this deck to me is like Venus in a box. I think I've said that before, and it might even be still in the same order as when I showed it in my spring basket collection, because as I mentioned, this deck lives spring basket adjacent, and it's definitely a deck that I work with in the springtime. And maybe it is because it feels very much like it has that Venus energy. It feels, again, very Venusian. Like this card to me like just sums up the idea of Taurus, of being very grounded and earthy, but also that very beautiful, sensual, luscious Empress energy, which is fantastic. I think this deck really fits the bill for that, and it's like a classic in my collection. I use it a lot. I really enjoy working with it. Again, just tapping into that, you know, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's sensual. The cardstock is luscious too. It's that Baba Studios cardstock that just feels wonderful to shuffle. And the backs are quite beautiful. Like it comes in a beautiful box. I mean, same as the like Fyodor Pavlov tarot. I could have, you know, said the same things about it as well. But this deck to me just on the whole feels very Venus and Taurus. So another deck that I also mentioned in my spring baskets or spring basket adjacent is the Tarot Muha. And this one is, again, a deck that feels very much like a Venus energy to me. But what it also feels like is, and I think I mentioned it in that video, oh look, title cards. What it also feels like to me is that transition period between the Aries and Taurus season. So if I was smart, I would have started the video with this one, but I mean, I could edit, but I'm not going to. So, I mean, I edit, but I'm not going to move this segment of the video around. Anyway, yeah, this deck feels like it is Aries moving into Taurus, where there was a beautiful write-up in one of the books. I think maybe it was in this one. Let's just look really quickly because it really summed up what I felt like this deck represented. So it says, Taurus moves away from the impulsivity of Aries, teaching us to slow down and connect with our bodies. While Aries emboldens us, Taurus demonstrates stillness and silence. So I really feel like that whole vibe, that whole energy comes through in this deck. It is slower, I feel like. It's like it has a little bit of that Aries energy in it. There's still like feels like there's still some fiery cards coming through, some of that fiery energy coming through, but it is settling into that beautiful, grounded, more slow moving energy of Taurus. It's also, again, very sensual and beautiful. It's very ornately created or drawn, like the borders are ornate and everything. Like the backs are really ornate, the box is lovely. While the cardstock really isn't my favorite because it's kind of like that glossy, stiffer stuff to work with, it's still like kind of that shiny, sensual kind of feel in the hand, right? And I feel like this deck is just that beautiful transition between the two decans and really represents that Venus energy really well, but also is still very grounded and very, very practical, right? This is, again, another Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and it's just a very grounded, practical reader. So the next little category that I have is decks that represent the bull. And I've kind of tied this in not only to the bull energy, in terms of like dependability and maybe a little bit of stubbornness, but also a little bit in that Hierophant-y view. So this is the Brady Tarot. Here's the backs. I do believe mine is the second edition. This is an indie deck. Sorry, I sometimes forget to mention that. The Fyodor Pavlov and the Tarot Muha are both mass market, and the Victorian Romantic is indie. So this deck for me is like, it's really grounded and really like solid like a bull is, but it also kind of like is super unapologetic, and it's just like it does its thing, and you either get on board or get out of the way. And I feel like that's kind of bull energy as well. It's also a little bit like stubborn. Like it's not going to change its perspective just because you're having a bad day. It's still going to tell you what it thinks. And yes, you totally personify my decks, but it has that really grounded, very dependable, very stable bull energy. But again, it's also kind of like bull in a china shop is just gonna run you over if you let it, or I should say if you're not prepared for it. It also has a bit of that Hierophant energy, because I feel like that not only the images, but the guidebook, which was written by the late Rachel Pollack and is just a treasure. I mean, she's a treasure, but there's so much wisdom in this deck and in that guidebook and this artwork as well, that I feel like it has a little bit of that Hierophant energy, as in it will teach you, it will guide you. You may not always like the messages, and you may not always appreciate, this card makes me go, I'm sorry, every time I see it, because like this little possum it's a possum, right? And I think I say this every time, but it's so dramatic over the whole, like he's not even being stabbed, but he's acting like he is. Anyway, sorry. This is very Hierophant-y to me, not only because of the messages in the artwork, but like there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. If you were just kind of sit at the foot of the Brady Tarot and let it teach you in the way that it needs to, you're going to learn a lot in your work with this deck. And so I feel like it fits really well into that symbol for the bull, but also that Taurus Hierophant energy, which I think is just fantastic for this particular time of year. And that's funny to me because this is actually, this deck, the next 3 decks that I'm going to share with you for that bull energy normally live in my dark side of the year, or my winter baskets. Winter or fall baskets. And so it's really interesting for me personally to take a look at my decks through this lens, because I'm pulling out decks I would normally pull out this time of year in order to tap into that energy, which is really cool. And I kind of appreciate like it doing something a little bit different for me in that way. So the next deck that feels like it sits in that space for me is the Anna K Tarot. And I do apologize because I do think this one is out of print now. I can't for the life of me imagine why it is, because it is like one of the best tarot decks I have. This deck for me sits very squarely in that symbol of the bull, as in it's very dependable. It is very practical. One of the things that I love about this deck, and one of the reasons that I used to recommend it all the time, I mean, I still would if it was in print, but maybe they're gonna bring out a new version, let's hope. Who's this by? I think maybe Llewellyn. I mean, if we could have a new version on this and like some gorgeous linen cardstock, wouldn't hurt my feelings any. Anyway, this deck for me sits in that bull space because it's also completely stripped of any esoterica. That's where I was going with that. I mean, not any, like it's inherent in the tarot, right? But a lot of the esoterica has been stripped away from this deck. And so it's all about the people and the experiences, and it's all about the everyday life. I've mentioned many times that this deck feels like it's like my family counselor. It's the deck that I go to for those kinds of readings. I know this art is kind of like it's very polarizing. You kind of either love it or hate it. I absolutely adore it. I have come to love these characters as if like they're my own little family here. This Lovers with the older couple is amazing. It's like one of my most favorite lovers ever. Clearly, I can talk a lot longer about the decks that I use that feel like they sit in that bull energy, that maybe even the Hierophant energy, right? Than the Venus energy, and that's kind of interesting to me because I feel like that's an energy that I actually feel much more comfortable with. I'm much more comfortable in the Hierophant side of myself than the Empress side of myself, which is quite interesting. But this deck also feels, talking about that Hierophant energy, it does feel very much like a guide. It doesn't feel like a guide as in a spiritual guide. It feels like a guide as in a family counselor, as in, or just any sort of wise person, right? Not talking about really spirituality, although you can get that in this deck for sure. But it's more for me talking about the everyday and how we navigate the everyday, and in particular, how we navigate those personal, close relationships that we have in our life. I often do a reading with this and the Llewellyn, where the Llewellyn stands in place for me and the Anna stands in place for my family. I think I have a whole video on that. I do have 2 copies of this deck. So I have this full-size one that we're seeing here, and then I have one that I've trimmed down to be the same size as my Llewellyn, so it's borderless with no titles or anything. And then that's the one I tend to use for those readings because this deck just works really well in that sense. And again, here's another card that is very polarizing. You either love it or hate it. I mean, yeah, her face is kind of funny, but I love the fact that she's not a model of an empress, right? She's like a real person. She looks more like a real person. She's beautifully imperfect, and I love that about her. And I think that is wonderful Taurus energy. That's like the more grounded, practical side of the Empress versus the really flowy, beautiful Venusian side, I guess, of the Empress. She can be both, right? She can be very grounded and practical, and she can also be very beautiful and sensual. And I think that that's just a wonderful way to look at it. But anyway, I'm totally getting off on a tangent here. Decks like these that I've used a lot, like I could talk about all day long because I've got so much personal history and connection to these decks that I could sit here and I could talk to you about every single card for hours on end and never get bored, but you probably would, so I won't. So the final deck that I've chosen to represent the Bull and the Hierophant is the Heindel Tarot, or Heindel. I'm unsure how you pronounce that. Here's the backs. Did I show the backs? I always forget if I show the backs. This deck to me it kind of fits the bill for all of these things, with the exception of maybe the Empress, Venus energy, because but then we have this. So prove me wrong, little Heindel Tarot. So maybe it does. Maybe it fits the bill for all of these things. This deck is very grounded. It feels very in alignment with the Bull energy because it is very stable. It's very kind of, I've seen or I've read like the Bull energy is like kind of like head in the earth, trudging through, just making its way. Not necessarily like I was saying earlier, like bull in a china shop, like that's a thing too. But there's also just the idea of sort of just plodding along, one foot in front of the other, getting done what needs to get done. And I feel like this deck does that really well. It feels very grounded into the earth. It has a lot of really earthy colors. There's a whole layer in here with some I Ching and astrological and all kinds of other esoteric references, which also make me think of that Hierophant energy. So where we were looking at the Anna K is that Hierophant energy in a more like everyday practical sense. This I would see more of in a spiritual sense, more of in a esoteric sense. But it also very much has just that kind of guide energy. If again, like the Brady, like the Anna K, if you will just sit at the knee of this deck and take your time with it and learn from it, it has a lot to teach you. This I feel like probably is a deck that requires a little bit more patience and determination, which I think are also very much in alignment with Taurus energy. Again, I'm only speaking of these energies in the way that I have experienced them and the things that I've read. So this is very like my own personal viewpoint on it. Yours may be completely different. That's one of the reasons why I like to see everybody making these videos, because we get to see how everybody experiences these energies. But this deck to me, it is Taurus. It is the Hierophant. It is the Bull. It is definitely Earth, and it is definitely fixed. We're going to get to that category here in just a second. And it's just so cool. I love the idea of like sitting with this deck as like a teacher, as a Hierophant energy, because there's so much to be learned here. There's some beautiful books, again, written by the late, great Rachel Pollack, and they are back in print now. I'll leave a link for them in the description box below for you because they are phenomenal. And when I talk about like sitting at the knee of of a Hierophant, of a teacher, of a guide, of somebody who has tremendous wisdom to share. Like, I could think of no one better than Rachel Pollack. So I would definitely recommend this deck for that and those books because they are fantastic. So the next category that we're going to look at for Taurus decks is decks that fit into both the element and quality. Now, I've kind of put these two together because for me, they kind of like exist in the same space. We have element of earth, and I really feel like every deck I've shown here is like an earthy deck for the most part. You know, maybe those Venus decks that I showed in the beginning, or maybe a couple of those are a stretch, but I do still feel like they kind of embody the earth element a little bit. But really what these ones are looking at is earth and that fixed quality. So let me just jump real quick into this guidebook here, into this book to touch base with that fixed energy. So it says the fixed signs embody qualities of preservation, stability, and dependability. Now, a lot of the decks I've shown already could fit into those as well, but I really tapped into kind of those three sort of energies for the three decks that I chose. The first one being the 78 Tarot Ecological for the idea of preservation, because this is all about a deck about preserving the earth, preserving our connection to the earth, and the devil's on top, and the connection that we have to the earth itself. And so it's a really cool deck. This is a collaborative art deck. So every card is created by a different artist. It's like, if I don't skip through, we won't get through this video, but like they're all so different. This is such a great deck for just that overall sort of earth fixed, sort of in that preservation kind of energy that is associated with that quality. And I think it does a really good job of bringing that to the forefront. You know, even like some of the changes in the quartz. So we have like the protector of water. We'll see, there's an activist, an idealist. Oh, I can't remember what the other one is. Maybe we'll come across it here, but yeah, it's such a cool deck in terms of, you know, connecting with that earth energy. And, oh, Nurturer, that's the other one. I think that is the Queen energy. Look how beautiful that card is. Gorgeous. Yeah, this deck was like, when I was looking at the decks that were like earth energy, this deck was kind of a no-brainer because like that's kind of its theme, right? It's all about nature, all about earth, and particularly about preserving earth, which is a very Tarian. How do you say that? I don't even know. A very Taurus energy. Is it Taran? Who knows? Anyway, super cool. Super cool. I really enjoy this one. This one, I think I kind of had a moment with the magical decks where I was like, I don't like the cardstock and I don't like the gilding. Okay, this one has the shiny on the back, which is cool. It has matte, gorgeous matte gilding, which is fantastic, and the cardstock is matte, so like perfection. If it was just a tiny bit smaller, just a little bit, just a ton, then it would be like, then it would be perfect, because like we want all the things all the time. And yeah, that's a Taurus energy too, right? Materialism. So they call this one Tarot of the Healing Earth. So I felt like that was a really good pick for this particular category. So again, another deck that kind of sits in that fixed earth energy for me is here we go again with this deck. Strange antlers, strange branches. Somebody in a comment had said branchlers, which maybe that's what we'll call it now. It's the branchlers deck. This is, and I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to say what is mass market and what is indie. I'm terrible at this. What did we look at so far? I don't even know. The 78 Ecological is indie, and the branchler deck here is mass market. It is a French deck, right? French deck. So it does have, you know, all French titles on it. But to me, this deck definitely feels like it sits in that it is very earthy. It is fixed in that sense of, I feel like it is very also sort of ecological minded, and it is also in that sort of dependable sort of energy. I don't know why. It's not like it's because it's a Rider-Waite Smith. I feel like it's just because this deck is like every time I pull it out, it's very consistent for me. And maybe that's sort of an energy that I associate with that fixed idea of its consistency. It's not moving. It doesn't really, like the way it reads for me doesn't really change based on my mood or like what I got going on. It kind of just speaks in its own language, and it does its thing. And it doesn't really, again, personifying my decks. Apologies to those who don't do that, but it doesn't change its mind. It just is what it is, right? And that feels like a very, very Taurus energy. I just am what I am, take me or leave me type of a thing. It does feel a little bit like that Empress and Hierophant too, because I feel like it is very beautiful. The women are all in their natural state, which is lovely. That feels very connected to the Empress energy. But also again, with that Hierophant energy, you know, sitting down and really learning the lessons from this deck. I think that this is a beautiful deck for that. And it just, I don't know, when it came down to like picking decks for these, like I have a lot that would fit in these categories. So you kind of like you have to like kind of pick a number and go with it. Otherwise, like we would be here like discussing half my collection, and that's more of a video than I want to make right now, and probably more of a video than you want to watch. But this one is the second deck I chose for that fixed earth energy. And the last tarot deck that I chose for this fixed earth energy will probably be no surprise to anyone, and it is my Green Witch Tarot. Here's the backs. Again, I always forget what the backs. This deck to me is Taurus energy because it is fixed earth. It is dependable. It is very much a Hierophant for me. It's very much a guide, very much a friend type of an energy. I've talked about this deck like endlessly on my channel. I feel like more so in recent years, so I must be sort of, you know, I don't know if evolving is the right word, but maybe my perspective is changing, where I feel like, I know blasphemy, but I almost feel a little bit more connected to this deck than the Llewellyn right now. And by right now, I mean at this point in my life. As I'm getting older, like I appreciate the Llewellyn, don't get me wrong, like it's not going anywhere. But this deck to me just embodies so much of my perspective and my practice and like my life. It does exist in this sort of fantasy cottagecore world, which is totally a world I would be game to live in. But it's a very grounded, very practical reader for me. It's dependable. I know that I can come to these cards, these characters, and I think I've said this before. It's like it's like coming back to an old friend where you just like pick right up where you left off, and like nothing's weird, nothing's awkward. It doesn't matter how much time passes between you. You're still just right there in sync with each other. And that's like me in this deck. It just doesn't matter how long it's been or whatever. It's always there for me. But it always has something to teach me. Like it never stops being my guide. It never stops being my little Hierophant. I think it's beautiful, so we could put it in that Empress category, but I would definitely call it more like Empressy, as in we see it kind of now nowadays where it's the sort of Mother Earth kind of Empress energy. I feel like I talked about that recently in a video, like not too long ago either, but it kind of exists in all of those. But again, being in that fixed earth, it feels very earthy. It's also very grounded, very dependable, and like it's just always a solid there for me deck. Okay, I want to wrap this little Decan collection for Taurus season up with a couple of, well, 3 honorable oracle mentions. Now, I didn't do oracles in my Aries one because, again, I wasn't real familiar with Aries energy, but Taurus, I feel like I'm more on board with. And I wanted to talk about a couple of the oracle decks that feel like they really exist in that space for me too. This is the Tree Whisper Oracle, the Secret Garden edition, I do believe. This one, I'm not entirely sure. It is an indie deck, and I'm not entirely sure what the current status of it is. I know that Mags did a reorder at some point, but I don't know where it's at right now. So I'll just leave a link for it for you so you can go check it out. This deck is a Taurus Hierophant beautiful, green, earthy, fixed, all the good things in one. Clearly it's a very green deck. Like, I love that. I guess as time goes on, and we were talking about like I'm evolving and changing, like green is becoming like one of my favorite colors. Maybe it always has been, but I've always been like, ooh, purple's cooler, right? Black's cooler, whatever it is. But I feel like I'm more green. That's just me, I think. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But green, that's a color I totally associate with Earth. I think most people do. And so this deck feels like Earth in a deck. It feels like fixed earth energy because, again, it's trees. They're very rooted into the earth. They're very grounded. They're very stable. We also have that kind of Taurus Hierophant energy going on here because there are faces, and hopefully you can see them within each of the cards. So the trees and the way that Mags has created this deck, it creates a face. And so to me, these are like tree elders that like they teach me things. And again, like that Hierophant, right? Sitting at the base of these trees, learning the lessons that they have to teach me. They're slow lessons most of the time. You know, and I mean that in the best possible way. These are slow lessons. They take time to develop. They take time to grow. And I just really, my experience with this deck has just been amazing. I mean, I know I've gushed about it multiple times on my channel, but I really feel like this deck is like a treasure. I think I even mentioned, like, was it in the deck you'd have to pry out of my cold dead hands? Like this could be one of those too. Like, I could never imagine giving this deck up for anything. It just is everything that I appreciate in an oracle deck. It has so many layers to it. It's very grounded. It's very earthy. It's very practical, but it also like dips into this gorgeous magical world at the same time. I mean, again, I could talk endlessly about the earthy decks that I love in my collection. But I just wanted to mention this one because this one definitely hits that Taurus, earthy, Hierophant kind of energy, and I just think that it is phenomenal. So I wanted to include it. So another oracle that I wanted to give an honorable mention to is the Compendium of Witches. So this deck, I've got it divided up into its two sections. I talked about recently in my wrap up where I talked about this last month was really the first time that I'd worked with this deck in detail, and in detail. Yeah, sure, why not, in detail. And I do feel like it sits very much in that Hierophant energy, and that these are beautiful guides. But for me, this is also very much in that Empress energy because like these guides they're just like these beautiful souls that feel very grounded, very connected to the earth, very in their element. And again, I would feel like this is a very earthy sort of deck. Like, it's very rooted, it's very grounded. And the other thing is it's actually very practical. It's really interesting because some of these, I think they're called witches. It's like, it's the Compendium of Witches. I just think of them as guides, but some of them are very like otherworldly, right? Like we have Hecate here. Or Hecate, depending on your tradition. Anyway, and they do, like the laborer, that's super grounded, super into the earth, but the listener feels very into the earth, very grounded. These are very, very practical guides. And I love the way that the deck kind of comes together in that creation of the guide and the messages. Even the message cards, I forget what they're called in the deck, my apologies, but this is kind of like a Lenormand-esque style of a deck. So it's very to the point, and like the messages are really succinct in the guidebook, and it's kind of like, there's your message. Here's your guide, here's your message. Like, it's no muss, no fuss. It feels very direct, very to the point, very grounded, and very like in the sort of everyday kind of like, here's the message and here's what you can do to kind of apply it in a very real world sense. So this deck There's the beautiful backs. Feels like a Taurus deck in the sense of like in that Hierophant energy, but also in that really grounded earthy energy as well. So the last deck that I want to share with you today is the Earth Wisdom Oracle. And this deck I chose for my honorable oracle mentions because this deck to me is sort of the quintessential earthy oracle deck. It is very grounded, very rooted into the earth. I love, ooh, card number 1's on top. It's always fun when that happens. Even though there are some concepts in this deck that may feel a little bit like otherworldly, it still feels very practical, very everyday. I can use this deck for anything. It goes with a huge majority of my collection, which is fantastic. But it also feels very much like, again, sitting at the Hierophants, the feet of the Hierophant. It feels very much into that Mother Earth energy. It also feels very much into the practicality and dependability of the bowl and the fixed quality of Earth. This is one of those decks that I can come to anytime I need a message. The little guidebook is great. There are crystals and plants, both of which I associate with that sort of earthy energy within this deck. And so when you get into the guidebook, you get that layer on top of it as well. And it's just like, you know, it's one of my favorite oracle decks. It's one that like always is there for me. It always provides me the message that I need in the moment. It's very practical, very grounded, even though it has some cards that occasionally will dip into the, like I said, maybe otherworldly. It does so in a very sort of realistic kind of way, which is funny considering what the context is, but here's the backs. It's just, again, a fantastic one that I feel like really represents the Taurus energy really, really well. My absolute only complaint with this deck is I wish there were more cards. So those are the decks that I chose to kind of represent those different aspects of the Taurus season. So I would love to know what decks you are working with for Taurus season, or if you're doing the Decan Walk decks that you feel resonate with this sort of an energy. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.